Folks, welcome back to another episode of Coffee, Tea, and Crime. Today we're going to look at the Sunset Strip killers. During the 1970s and 80s in Los Angeles, California, they had 20 known serial killers who were operating simultaneously within a 5-mile radius of each other. Killers like the Skid Row Stabber, who was never caught, the Hillside Strangler, who ended up becoming the Hillside Stranglers, the Freeway Killer, the Toolbox Killers, the Scorecard Killer, John Floyd Thomas Jr., William Suff, on and on. Now the duo we're going to talk about today is a male and a female who are involved in a series of killings in Los Angeles, and they would later be dubbed the Sunset Strip murderers because of Sunset Strip boulevards where the victims for the most part came from. Now these two miscreants met at a bar, and what a pair they were. They definitely were made for each other. Now the female was actually a nurse, but now during her childhood she had to deal with parents who were alcoholics, and the father had raped her allegedly. She'd gotten married, that husband had beat her, and this fella she met, he'd been in the military for a little bit, but as we're going to see, neither one of them are very good people, to say the least. They are sick. Now, when they met and started living together, they actually began molesting an 11-year-old girl that was in the same apartment complex they were in, and took photos of it. And now you would think that's bad enough, but then the male suspect began telling the female about his fantasies of killing people. He was definitely a sexual sadist. Now the information I'm going to use is going to come from the California Appellate Courts. June 12th of 1980, about 1:30 p.m., police are called to a freeway ramp near the Forest Lawn Cemetery. A highway worker had found the bodies of two young ladies, Cynthia Chandler, who was 16 years old, and her half-sister, Gina Morano, who was 15. Now, Cynthia had been wearing a pink jumpsuit. Now, it was found pulled down, wrapped around her legs. Both girls had been shot. Now, according to the medical examiner, Morano was killed by 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Both bullets had exited the skull. Now, Chandler had been shot in the head and in the chest. Now, the chest wound was a contact wound, which means that pretty well the killer stuck the pistol right up to her chest. The 2 bullets from her body were recovered. Now, the ME estimated that the 2 girls had been dead for at least 12 hours. And the ME was telling the police that it appeared from the bodies that this was not the death scene, that they had been killed somewhere else and then dumped here. Now, part of that had to do with, said there was an absence of puddles of blood where the bodies were found, and said there appeared to be post-mortem scratches and abrasion on Chandler's body. Now, there was sperm recovered from Chandler's body from her vagina. Now, it did not appear that Marano had been sexually assaulted, only Chandler. Now, according to the suspects, the male suspect who was on his own on this particular occasion, he'd picked the girls up on June 11th. Now, he was only interested in the blonde, the Chandler girl. He wasn't interested in Marano. But Marano wasn't going to leave her half-sister, so he got them both in his car. Now, he paid Chandler $30 for oral sex. Now, the suspect told Marano he didn't want her to watch, so she turned her head. When she did, he fired one shot into her head. And then, of course, when Chandler raises up to see what's going on, he shoots her in the head. Now, according to him, neither girl died right away. So he shot Marano in the head a second time and Chandler in the chest. Now, according to him, this is what he's telling his co-defendant, the female. Because, of course, to the police, he's denied all knowledge of this. He said after he'd shot the girls and killed them, he drove them to a rental garage he had. He dragged the bodies inside, and he played with these two dead bodies for about 4 hours on a bed that he had in that garage. According to what the female suspect's saying, the male suspect said that he had anal intercourse with Marano and vaginal intercourse with Chandler. Now, according to the male suspect, he then left the garage and he waited till it got dark, and he went back to the garage, put the two bodies in the car, and drove them over and dumped them along the freeway. Now, the male suspect gave the female suspect 2 bullets that he said had gone through Marano's head. June 23rd, 1980. There's a working girl named Karen Jones. She's out on Sunset Boulevard. There's not been to this point anyways, this early in the case, there's no coverage, no media coverage, nothing about, oh, there's a serial killer operating. Of course, after our earlier discussion about how many serial killers were working at the same time in this area, I don't think it'd really matter. Now, this Jones victim, she was found at about 3:15 a.m. She was lying on the curb there by the street, pool of blood around her face and hair. Cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. Now, they recovered a .25 caliber jacketed bullet from her skull. ME estimates that the gun had been held 6 to 12 inches from the head. ME also said that Jones had died sometime between midnight and 2 a.m. on June 23rd. Now, the ME couldn't determine if there had been any sexual encounter between her and the suspect. Now, also, at about that same time, in that time period within a few hours, at 7:15 a.m. in the morning, a decapitated body is found. The victim would later be identified as Exie Wilson, and she was found in a parking lot of a restaurant in a dumpster. Now, the found beside her was a red dress with a sash, and the sash had been cut to pieces. Don't know if that meant anything or not. Now, 4 days after this, on June 27th, at about 1 a.m., a wooden box was found in an alley. And inside that box is the severed head of the Wilson woman. And the head was wrapped in a pair of jeans and a pink t-shirt with the inscription, "Daddy's Girl." Now, it would later be determined that these articles of clothing would belong to another victim. Now, it appeared from the investigation that the head had been frozen. Also appeared that it had been cleaned. Now, the female suspect would later say that when the male suspect brought the head home, she's the one that cleaned it off and put makeup on the severed head. She said it was just like playing with a giant Barbie doll. Now, the ME said that Wilson had died in that same time frame as Jones, midnight to 2 a.m. on the 23rd of June 1980. Now, the ME said he's pretty sure that the head was cut off after death, but he's not for sure. There's a possibility the victim might have still been alive. Now, ME said there was 15 to 20 cuts in order to get the head severed from the body, was his estimation. Cause of death was a gunshot wound to the back of the head. And they did recover a .25 caliber jacketed bullet from the head. They did recover sperm samples from Wilson's body. Now, according to the story the female suspect told, the male suspect said that he saw Jones and Wilson together. So now he picked up the Wilson woman first. He drove her over to the parking lot of a restaurant, shot her in the back of the head as she's committing oral sex on him. That's a risky proposition. You got the victim head down in your lap and you're going to fire a round into their head. If that bullet jumps out somewhere, our suspect sure would have regretted it. So this right here tells you not only is he a sick individual, he's also not very bright. Now, after he'd shot her, he said he'd cut her head off with a buck knife. Now, he got worried because of that Jones girl had been there when he picked up Wilson. So he thought he'd better go back and silence her. So he finds Jones, shoots her, and just leaves her there on the street. June 30th, 1980, Marnette Comer, and this is the victim whose clothing was used to wrap around the head of Exie Wilson. She's found in a ravine off Foothill Boulevard, not far from the freeway. Now, folks, on these locations, most of them are so vague that I couldn't get exact locations. But I did the best I could. Now, the ME says that Comer had been dead for 20 to 90 days because the victim's skin had begun to dry and mummify. Now, it shows that Comer had suffered 3 gunshot wounds to the chest. 2 .25 caliber bullets were recovered from the body. Sister of Comer had said the last time she'd seen her sister, she had been wearing a pink t-shirt that said Daddy's Girl. So that tied it in with the Wilson woman. Now, according to the male suspect, he killed a girl, referred to her as Foothill, which is going to be the Comer woman. Told her, yeah, I dumped her body near Foothill Boulevard. He said he'd originally picked her up off Sunset Boulevard, and he was driving the female suspect's car to do his killing. Now, he said he shot her 4 times, and she wouldn't die. In fact, she began kicking him and assaulting him. Well, he finally got the best of her, and according to him, he gutted her like a fish. sliced her belly open, is what he told her. August 26, 1980, they got a Jane Doe. And this body was discovered near the Sierra Highway in Antelope Valley. Worker was out there inspecting the water towers and he found some human bones. There was a clump of blonde hair. Now they never did figure out who this female was, but cause of death was a gunshot wound to the back of the head, and a .25 caliber jacketed bullet was recovered from the skull. Now, according to the male suspect, in his story to the female, he picked up this Jane Doe. He referred to her as Water Tower since that's where he dumped the body. They picked her up in Hollywood and then shot her to death inside the car. And again, he shot her in the back of the head while she's performing oral sex on him. Then the suspect drove out to that area in Antelope Valley. Now, according to him, he drugged the dead victim out of the car, laid her across the hood of the car, and engaged in sexual intercourse with the dead body. Now, allegedly, that female suspect was with the male on one or two of these killings. At least one, they think. Now, the two pistols, by the way, he had two pistols. The female suspect had purchased those for him to use. Now, after a while, the female suspect is starting to get to her, all the killing and all the activities they've been involved in. In fact, she was so tore up over this, she actually mentioned it to an ex-boyfriend of hers, a fella named Murray. Now, of course, then later she starts to get worried that she's told this fella that her and her live-in boyfriend are been involved in some murders. So what she does is, he's always playing at these bars and clubs. He's a singer. Well, anyways, she gets a plan, so she gets him to come outside to his van with an offer of sex. Then after he got in the van with her, she shot him and stabbed him. She was worried about the bullet she'd fired at his head, so she decapitated him. So they took the head and threw it in a trash can. Now, the head was never found. Now, Murray's body was found on August the 9th, 1980, in a residential area in Van Nuys. The neighbors were complaining about the smell. And how they were finally caught, the female finally tells her co-workers about it. The co-workers obviously call the police and they're arrested. Now, the male is charged with 6 counts of murder and he's given a death sentence, which of course has not been carried out. Now, the female, she wasn't given a death sentence, but she did die in prison of natural causes, 2003.